The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the concrete courtyard of Barangay Santo Niño, one of the poorest communities in General Santos City. Manny Pacquiao stepped out of his simple sedan, deliberately choosing not to arrive in his usual convoy of security vehicles. He wanted this visit to feel genuine, personal and free from the overwhelming spectacle that often accompanied his public appearances. The narrow streets were lined with makeshift homes constructed from corrugated metal sheets, wooden planks, and whatever materials families could salvage to create shelter for their loved ones. Children began gathering around him almost immediately, their faces lighting up with recognition and wonder. Some were barefoot, wearing clothes that had been mended multiple times, yet their smiles were radiant and infectious. Manny knelt down to their level, shaking tiny hands and ruffling hair with the same gentleness he showed his own children at home. He had come here without cameras, without media attention, simply to spend time with families who reminded him of his own childhood struggles and the community that had shaped him into the man he became. The local barangay captain, Angelo, approached with a mixture of surprise and gratitude written across his weathered face. He had received word that someone special wanted to visit their community, but he never imagined it would be the internationally celebrated boxing champion himself. Angelo had grown up in these same streets, watching families struggle to put food on their tables, children walking miles to attend school, and parents working multiple jobs just to survive another day. The presence of someone who had risen from similar circumstances felt like a beacon of hope for everyone in the neighborhood. As they walked through the narrow pathways between homes, Manny listened intently to Angelo's stories about the community's daily challenges. Families here often went without electricity for days. Clean water was a luxury that required long walks to distant wells, and medical care seemed like an impossible dream for most residents. Yet despite these hardships, there was an undeniable spirit of resilience and mutual support that reminded Manny of the values his mother Dionysia had instilled in him during their own years of poverty and uncertainty. The visit had been arranged quietly through a local church leader who knew about Manny's desire to give back to communities that reflected his own humble beginnings. There were no photographers, no publicity teams, no predetermined schedule of events designed to create media buzz. This was simply a man returning to his roots, seeking to understand how he could make a meaningful difference in the lives of people who continued to face the same struggles he had once endured as a young boy in Kibawe, Bukidnon. Word spread quickly through the barangay that Manny Pacquiao was walking among them, not as a celebrity making a grand entrance, but as a neighbor who understood their daily struggles. Mothers emerged from their homes carrying their youngest children. Teenagers paused their basketball games to catch a glimpse of their hero, and elderly residents sitting in the shade began sharing stories about watching his fights on old television sets borrowed from more fortunate neighbors. The atmosphere was charged with excitement, but also with a profound sense of connection that transcended fame and fortune. Among the small crowd that had gathered was Ligaya, a single mother of 3, who worked as a laundrywoman to support her family. Her hands, permanently stained and roughened from years of washing clothes by hand, trembled slightly as she approached Manny with her youngest son, a 7-year-old boy named Miguel. The child had been battling a persistent illness that required medication the family simply could not afford, and Ligaya had been praying for some kind of miracle or intervention that could help her son get the treatment he desperately needed. Miguel was small for his age, with large, intelligent eyes that seemed to hold wisdom beyond his years. Despite his physical frailness, there was something remarkably strong about his spirit, a quiet determination that reminded Manny of his own childhood resilience when faced with overwhelming obstacles. The boy clutched a small, worn notebook against his chest, filled with drawings and stories he had created during the long hours when illness kept him confined to their one-room home. His creativity and imagination served as an escape from the harsh realities of their daily existence. Ligaya had heard countless stories about Manny's generosity and kindness, but she had never imagined she would have the opportunity to meet him in person. She watched nervously as her son looked up at the famous boxer, with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. Miguel had seen Manny's fights on television at their neighbor's house, always cheering loudly despite his small voice, and declaring that he too would become strong and brave like his hero. The child's enthusiasm for boxing came not from any desire for violence, but from his deep admiration for someone who had overcome poverty and adversity. As Manny knelt down to speak with Miguel, Ligaya felt her heart race with a combination of hope and anxiety. She had taught her children to be respectful and well-mannered, especially when meeting people who held positions of importance or respect in their community. Miguel had been practicing what he might say if he ever met Manny Pacquiao, rehearsing questions and comments in the mirror of their small bathroom, dreaming of a moment that seemed as unlikely as winning the lottery. The conversation began simply, with Manny asking Miguel about school, his favorite subjects, and his dreams for the future. The boy's responses were thoughtful and articulate, demonstrating an intelligence that had been nurtured by his mother's dedication to his education despite their financial limitations. Ligaya had made countless sacrifices to ensure her children could attend school, often going without meals herself so they could have proper uniforms and school supplies. Education represented the only path she could see toward a better life for her family. Other families in the community began gathering at a respectful distance, sensing that something special was unfolding between the boxing champion and the young boy. Children peered from behind their parents' legs, teenagers paused their activities to listen, and elderly residents moved closer to witness what felt like a significant moment in their neighborhood's history. There was an electricity in the air, a sense that this encounter would be remembered and discussed for years to come among the residents of Barangay Santo Niño. As the conversation continued, Miguel's initial nervousness began to fade, replaced by a growing confidence that came from Manny's genuine interest in his thoughts and feelings. The boy had always been naturally curious about life's bigger questions, often asking his mother about topics that seemed too complex for someone his age to fully understand. His illness had given him plenty of time to think about subjects like purpose, suffering, hope, and the meaning of existence in ways that most 7-year-olds never consider. These contemplations had shaped him into a remarkably thoughtful child who approached the world with both innocence and profound wisdom. Suddenly, Miguel's expression became more serious, and he looked directly into Manny's eyes with an intensity that surprised everyone present. The question that emerged from his small voice was not what anyone expected from a child his age, yet it carried the weight of genuine spiritual curiosity and deep personal significance. His mother, Ligaya, felt her breath catch in her throat, wondering how such a profound inquiry had formed in her son's young mind and what had prompted him to voice it at this particular moment. The question hung in the air like a challenge that demanded honesty, vulnerability, and authentic response rather than the typical diplomatic answers that public figures often provide when discussing sensitive topics. Everyone in the gathering seemed to sense that this was no ordinary interaction between a celebrity and a fan, but rather a genuine human moment that would require real emotional engagement and personal truth. The atmosphere shifted from casual excitement to something approaching reverence as people realized they were witnessing something truly meaningful. Manny felt the profound weight of the child's questions settling in his chest, recognizing that his response would not only impact Miguel, but would also be heard by every person present in the community. This was not a moment for rehearsed public relations statements or carefully crafted sound bites designed to appeal to the broadest possible audience. The sincerity in Miguel's eyes demanded nothing less than complete honesty about his own spiritual journey, his struggles with faith, and the role that belief had played in his transformation from impoverished child to world champion. The silence that followed the question was not uncomfortable, but rather filled with anticipation and respect for the gravity of what had been asked. Parents instinctively drew their children closer, teenagers stopped their whispered conversations, and elderly residents leaned forward to ensure they would not miss a single word of Manny's response. Even the sounds of the neighborhood seemed to quiet, as if the entire community was holding its breath, waiting for an answer that everyone sensed would be deeply personal and potentially life-changing. Angelo, the barangay captain, recognized that he was witnessing something extraordinary, a moment that transcended the usual boundaries between celebrity and community, between public figure and private individual. The question had created a space for authentic human connection that felt sacred and transformative, reminding everyone present that beneath all the fame and achievement, they were simply sharing a profound moment of spiritual reflection between a man and a child seeking truth. Manny's mind immediately traveled back to his own childhood in Kibawe, Bukidnon, where faith had been both a source of comfort and a subject of profound questioning during the most difficult periods of his young life. He remembered nights when hunger made sleep nearly impossible, lying on a thin mat beside his siblings, while his mother Dionysia whispered prayers in the darkness, asking for strength to face another day of uncertainty. Those early experiences with poverty had shaped his understanding of faith as something that sustained people through circumstances that seemed impossible to endure through human strength alone. There had been moments during his youth when he had questioned whether God truly existed, especially during periods when his family's suffering seemed endless and meaningless. He recalled the frustration of watching his mother work multiple jobs, yet still struggle to provide basic necessities for her children, and the anger he had felt toward a universe that seemed indifferent to their pain. These doubts had been natural and honest responses to genuine hardship, not signs of weakness or spiritual failure, but rather evidence of a thinking person grappling with life's most fundamental questions about justice, purpose, and divine care. His relationship with faith had evolved significantly throughout his boxing career, particularly during the periods when success brought new challenges and responsibilities that he had never anticipated. The pressure of being a national hero, the weight of representing the Philippines on the world stage, and the complexity of managing sudden wealth and fame had all contributed to deeper spiritual reflection about his purpose and calling. Each major fight had become not just a physical contest, but also a spiritual journey that required him to examine his motivations, his gratitude, and his responsibility to others. The transformation in his understanding of faith had been gradual rather than sudden, built through countless experiences of receiving help when he needed it most, witnessing miraculous coincidences that seemed to guide his path, and feeling a sense of purpose that extended far beyond personal achievement. His success in boxing had never felt like something he had accomplished entirely through his own effort, but rather like a gift that had been entrusted to him for reasons that were larger than his individual dreams and ambitions. He thought about his wife Jinky and their children, Jimuel, Michael, Princess, Queen Elizabeth, and Israel, and how becoming a father had deepened his appreciation for the concept of divine love and protection. Watching his own children grow and develop had given him new insight into the idea of a heavenly Father who cared for his creation with infinite patience, wisdom, and compassion. The unconditional love he felt for his children had become a window into understanding how God might view all of humanity, regardless of their circumstances, achievements, or failures. Standing in this impoverished community, surrounded by families who continued to struggle with the same challenges he had once faced, Manny felt a profound connection to his younger self and a deep appreciation for the journey that had brought him to this moment. The question from Miguel was not just an opportunity to share his beliefs, but also a chance to honor the struggles of his own childhood and the faith that had sustained his family through their darkest hours. Manny knelt down until he was at eye level with Miguel, placing a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder, as he began to speak with a sincerity that made his voice slightly tremble with emotion. His answer came not from a place of religious doctrine or theological training, but from the depths of personal experience and genuine spiritual conviction that had been forged through years of struggle, triumph, and deep reflection. The words he chose were simple enough for a 7-year-old to understand, yet profound enough to resonate with every adult present who had their own relationship with faith, doubt, and hope. He spoke about growing up in poverty, similar to what many families in this community experience daily, describing nights when his family went to bed hungry and mornings when they wondered where their next meal would come from. Yet even in those darkest moments, he explained, there had always been something inside him that whispered hope, that suggested tomorrow might bring new possibilities, and that their suffering was not meaningless or forgotten. This inner voice, he told Miguel, was what he had come to understand as God's presence in his life, working through both good times and difficult seasons. Manny's voice grew stronger as he described how his boxing career had taught him that physical strength alone was never enough to overcome life's greatest challenges. Every significant victory in the ring had required not just training and technique, but also faith in something larger than himself, a belief that he was being guided and supported by forces beyond his own understanding. He explained to Miguel that believing in God did not mean that life would be easy, or that prayers would always be answered in the ways people expected, but rather that there was always reason for hope and purpose, even in the midst of suffering. The crowd around them had grown larger, with people straining to hear every word as Manny continued sharing his testimony with the child. Parents found themselves wiping away tears as they recognized their own struggles in his story. Teenagers looked on with newfound respect for someone they had previously seen only as a sports hero, and elderly residents nodded with recognition of wisdom that came only from lived experience. His words were creating a bridge between his extraordinary success and their ordinary struggles, revealing the common humanity that connected them all. As Manny spoke about gratitude, responsibility, and the obligation to help others who were still struggling, Miguel's eyes never left his face, absorbing every word with an intensity that suggested he understood far more than his years might indicate. The boy's serious expression had softened into something approaching wonder, as if he was receiving answers to questions he had been carrying in his heart for much longer than anyone realized. His mother, Ligaya, stood nearby with tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the kindness and attention this famous man was showing her son. The response continued for several more minutes, touching on themes of perseverance, community, love for family, and the importance of using whatever gifts or opportunities one received to make life better for others. Manny's answer was not a sermon or a lecture, but rather a sharing of personal truth that honored both the child's question and the struggles of everyone present. By the time he finished speaking, there was not a dry eye among the adults who had gathered to witness this extraordinary moment of authentic human connection. The impact of Manny's words rippled through the gathered crowd like stones thrown into still water, touching hearts and stirring emotions that many of the residents had kept buried beneath the daily struggle for survival. Older women like Rosario and Amihan began weeping openly, their tears carrying years of accumulated hope and disappointment, prayers that had seemed unanswered, and dreams that had been deferred by circumstances beyond their control. These women had raised children in this community, watching them grow up with limited opportunities, yet refusing to let poverty steal their dignity or their faith in better days ahead. Young fathers like Bayani and Isagani felt their own eyes filling with moisture as they recognized their own spiritual journeys reflected in Manny's honest testimony. Many of them had worked multiple jobs trying to provide for their families, sometimes questioning whether their efforts mattered or whether there was any larger purpose to their daily struggles. Hearing someone who had achieved worldwide success acknowledge the same doubts and fears they experienced daily made them feel less alone in their challenges and more hopeful about their own potential for positive change. The teenagers present, including several boys who had dreams of becoming boxers themselves, found themselves looking at Manny with new eyes, seeing him not just as a sports celebrity, but as someone who understood their deepest questions about purpose, meaning, and possibility. Young men like Jericho and Renato had grown up watching Manny's fights on borrowed televisions, cheering for every victory, but they had never imagined that their hero had experienced the same spiritual doubts and economic hardships that shaped their own daily existence. Miguel's response to Manny's answer was perhaps the most powerful of all, as the 7-year-old boy simply nodded with a wisdom that seemed to come from somewhere far beyond his years. The child's acceptance and understanding of Manny's testimony created a moment of pure connection that transcended age, status, and circumstance, reminding everyone present that profound spiritual truth could be shared and received by anyone willing to approach it with an open heart and genuine curiosity about life's deeper meanings. Ligaya found herself overwhelmed, not just by the attention her son was receiving, but by the realization that this encounter would become a defining moment in Miguel's young life, something he would carry with him through whatever challenges and opportunities lay ahead. She had raised her children to be respectful and thoughtful, but she had never imagined that her son's natural spiritual curiosity would create such a powerful moment of community connection and shared reflection on faith, hope, and human resilience. As the formal part of the conversation concluded, families began approaching Manny with their own stories, their own struggles, and their own expressions of gratitude for his willingness to share such personal and meaningful insights about his spiritual journey. The afternoon had transformed from a simple community visit into something approaching a spiritual gathering, where people felt safe to express their deepest hopes and fears to someone who clearly understood their experiences and treated their struggles with dignity and respect. In the days that followed Manny's visit to Barangay Santo Niño, the impact of his conversation with Miguel continued to reverberate through the community in ways that surprised even the most optimistic residents. The story of the little boy's question and the champion's heartfelt response spread quickly through neighboring barangays, carried by word of mouth and social media posts that captured the emotional power of that afternoon encounter. Families who had not been present began visiting the community to hear first-hand accounts from those who had witnessed the exchange, creating an informal pilgrimage of people seeking hope and inspiration. Miguel himself seemed transformed by the experience, carrying himself with a quiet confidence that reflected his new understanding of his own worth and potential. His illness continued to require medical attention, but his spirit appeared strengthened by the knowledge that someone he admired had taken his questions seriously and had shared profound personal truths in response. The boy began writing in his notebook with renewed energy, creating stories and drawings that reflected themes of faith, perseverance, and the importance of helping others who were struggling with their own challenges. Ligaya noticed significant changes in her neighbors and friends, who began speaking more openly about their own spiritual journeys and their hopes for their children's futures. Women like Clarita and Luzviminda, who had previously kept their struggles private, started meeting regularly to pray together and share resources for their families. The community's response to Manny's visit had created new bonds of mutual support and encouraged residents to see their circumstances not as reasons for shame, but as foundations for strength and solidarity. The local church, led by Father Tomasi, reported increased attendance at services and more active participation in community outreach programs designed to help families with immediate needs like food, clothing, and basic medical care. Young men who had previously shown little interest in community involvement began volunteering for cleanup projects and youth mentorship programs, inspired by Manny's example of using success to lift others rather than simply achieving personal advancement. The spirit of service and mutual aid that had always existed in the barangay became more organized and intentional. Angelo, the barangay captain, found himself fielding inquiries from other communities and organizations that wanted to learn about what had happened during Manny's visit and how similar moments of connection and inspiration could be created in their own neighborhoods. The story had become a template for authentic community engagement that went beyond charity or publicity to create genuine human connection and shared spiritual reflection. Local government officials began discussing ways to support and expand the positive changes they were witnessing in the community. As word of the encounter continued to spread beyond General Santos City, reaching other provinces and even international Filipino communities, Miguel's simple question and Manny's profound response became symbols of the power of honest spiritual dialogue and the importance of remaining connected to one's roots regardless of personal success or achievement. The conversation had demonstrated that the most meaningful exchanges often happen not in formal settings or planned events, but in moments of authentic human connection where people feel safe to ask their deepest questions and share their most personal truths. Months later, as Manny prepared for what would be announced as his final professional boxing match, he often found himself thinking about Miguel's question and the profound afternoon they had shared in Barangay Santo Niño. The encounter had reminded him of why his success had always felt meaningful beyond personal achievement, and why his responsibility to represent the Philippines with dignity and purpose extended far beyond the boxing ring. The boy's spiritual curiosity had rekindled his own appreciation for the journey that had brought him from poverty to international recognition, and for the faith that had sustained him through every challenge. During his final pre-fight interviews, Manny frequently referenced the lessons he had learned from his interactions with communities like Santo Niño, emphasizing that his greatest victories had not been measured in championship belts or prize money, but in moments of genuine human connection and the opportunity to inspire hope in people facing their own struggles. His upcoming retirement from boxing would allow him to dedicate more time to community visits and spiritual reflection, continuing the work of encouragement and service that had always been central to his understanding of his purpose and calling. Miguel's health had gradually improved with the help of medical treatment that had been arranged following Manny's visit, but more importantly, the boy's spirit had flourished as he embraced his role as a young leader in his community. He began sharing his own stories and drawings with other children, teaching them about perseverance, faith, and the importance of asking meaningful questions about life's deeper purposes. His notebook had grown into several volumes filled with creative expressions that reflected his growing understanding of hope, resilience, and service to others. The community of Santo Niño had become a model for other barangays, seeking to strengthen their own social bonds and spiritual foundations, hosting visits from church leaders, social workers, and community organizers who wanted to understand how one afternoon conversation had catalyzed such positive and lasting change. Ligaya had become an informal community coordinator, helping to organize regular gatherings where residents could share their struggles and successes while supporting each other through both practical assistance and spiritual encouragement. As Manny reflected on his career and his plans for the future, he realized that Miguel's question had provided him with the perfect framework for understanding his own legacy, not just as a boxer who had achieved international success, but as a person who had remained faithful to his beliefs, connected to his community, and committed to using his platform to encourage others in their own journeys of faith and hope. The boy's spiritual curiosity had reminded him that the most important questions in life were often the simplest ones, asked by people who approach the world with genuine wonder and authentic desire for truth. The story of their encounter would continue to be told throughout the Philippines and in Filipino communities around the world, serving as a reminder that faith, hope, and human connection could flourish in any circumstances when people were willing to approach each other with honesty, respect, and genuine care for each other's spiritual and emotional well-being. Miguel's question and Manny's answer had created a moment of grace that would inspire countless others to seek their own authentic relationships with faith, community, and the deeper purposes that give meaning to human existence. If you like this story, leave your like and subscribe to our channel.